The Soviet Union were a very interesting group and an interesting era of history. Mainly because of the sheer amount of hubris that seems to have infected the communist state from almost the get-go. They really believed they could create a homus novus, new humanity which didn't have greed or all the bad parts of human personalities. Avarice, greed, jealousy, all those things they get rid of. They also, later on, imagined they created a political system which relied on an authoritarian, authoritarian regime to keep it in power, and that they could maintain such a system without having an actual dictator in it. They could somehow manage away the need for the ultimate authority in an authoritarian regime. That didn't go well for them. It didn't go well for them with the authoritarian regime in the first place. The big problem about communism, and I'm going to say this now before we get into it, is you have to have people involved. And I realise Bill Maher has said this best, but the trouble with people is, well, with humans is they don't make good people, but the trouble with people is they're really not nice to each other. They really aren't. Before you start thinking about racism or any of the various divisions we have, just think about your average workplace. Okay? Before you get into any racism or anything like that, just think about how some of your colleagues act around you. There are going to be the ones who form their little cliques where they get together and chat. There are the ones who are always competing for everything, even when there's no real point in competing for it. There are the ones who are making a big thing out of the fact that they work 24 hours a day on the job, and you really don't know how it takes them that long to do that amount of work, because it really shouldn't. But they make a big thing about it's a great thing for them to do. The trouble is, you might imagine that you can run a political system based entirely on people like you, and it will be perfect because they'll have your views and sort of personality and work ethic. And it'll be great. The reality is the political system will involve a lot of people like your colleagues from work. And who knows? To them, you might be one of those colleagues. So this is why we have democracy. And why am I getting into the nature of politics when I'm discussing the Soviets' torpedo punch? Why, when I'm going to talk about the Ilyushin DB-3 and the Il-4, am I talking politics? Well, because the whole programs cannot be got away from Mother Russia. They cannot be got away from the Soviet Union, from its greatness, and they also cannot be got away from its strategic issues. It is a nation which is mahusiv, which geostrategically is, well, how do I put this politely? It might have access to 4 oceans. That doesn't mean it has a contiguous coast. And, in fact, if you asked the Soviet Union which country they would probably most like to exchange their position with, they would probably sacrifice everything on a strategic level to exchange places with Australia. That would be their dream. Strategic depth, security, all sides. They can shut the rest of the world out and be happy on their own. But that's not their situation. They have mountains for some parts of their borders. They have oceans for other parts of their borders. And securing all of that is a problem, because you pretty much need 4 navies. And this is one of the reasons why the Soviet Union gets very interested in torpedo bombers. Because, wow, hey! You no longer need 4 navies. After all, the air is one. I see that come up. So still people produce ideas which is the air is one and indivisible and the air is special. I've got a whole scuttlebutt video coming up about that at some point. And it really isn't. The idea becomes, well, we can have this fleet of aircraft, we can send them to where we need them. And they realize the sheer amount of infrastructure you need to build to support those aircraft and to move those aircraft around. And very quickly it becomes, no, we need thousands of aircraft. We need literally thousands of aircraft. That's it. Be all and end all. And this aircraft was the start of the mass numbers of aircraft. And Tupolev are, of course, the famous and historical bomber company. You know, they're the company we associate with modern Russian bombers, modern Soviet bombers. But the thing is, the ones we're talking about today are both from Ilyushin, who are more traditionally associated with the joyous things that are their airborne early warning, their long-range maritime patrol aircraft, and their transport aircraft. All useful, good aircraft, all long-range aircraft, and all harking back to their bomber past. The thing is, Tupolev pretty much had a lock on the bomber from the early on period. They did, however, manage to do something that rather put them in trouble. Now, you know someone's a good engineer when he doesn't get killed by Stalin when he pisses him off. And this is going to be a strange part in this video because, and one of the reasons why I got off by discussing my views on, I got started by discussing my views on communism. Because I'm about to say something nice about Stalin, and I do realize that in many circles, if you say something nice about Stalin, you are automatically evil. Well, there are quotes of Stalin's which I actually agree with, and this is one of them. You see, Tupolev, that excellent designer, who obviously seems to sometimes exercise the political sensibilities of a mouse, makes a statement to do with this aircraft, that those problems which pilots and other aircrew are finding in them, they are just trivialities. They're nothing to really worry about. Now, here is the thing. The response from Stalin is swift, it's painful, and it's to the point. There are no trivialities in aviation. Everything is serious, and any uncorrected triviality could lead to the loss of an aircraft and its crew. Yes, you are hearing correctly. A man who will quite happily send millions to their death, thousands with barely a gun between them at Stalingrad and various other battles, is actually worried about the lives of people. Or rather, he felt there were enough problems that it justified him making a statement. I am not sure if this is a sign that Stalin did have something of a conscience, or potentially he felt aircraft were far too valuable to lose in stupid ways. I'm going to go with the aircraft thing. That makes more sense and doesn't worry me quite so much about Stalin. But, yes, Stalin gets upset with you. And then, amazingly, something interesting starts happening. As experience goes on and experience builds up, well, for a little while, Ilyushin can do no wrong. The contracts come out, and they go to Ilyushin. They win. Until Tupolev has learnt his lesson, I presume. To the pleasure of Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. The advantage of a dictatorship is when they care about something, something usually happens. When they care. The trouble is it can also lead you to things like the Winter War, where you lose so many aircraft, you keep supplying the Finnish with enough aircraft to actually give them squadrons. There is a problem in this one. Also, some of them are picked up by the Germans and passed to the Finns, but the Finns do like operating squadrons of Russian aircraft. So before anyone gets too upset about the symbology here, that's a blue on white one. That's quite a traditional traditional symbol for the Finnish. So, shameless book plug, because I do one in every single video, because it matters. If you've seen them before, you don't want to see again, skip a couple minutes in the future. I'll probably be finished. As you might have known from the sign, I'm an academic. It's not a catching disease. I try and make naval history and loving it a catching disease, a communicable disease, but being an academic isn't one. I recommend it if you want the skills and you need it. If you don't, there are other ways in life. In fact, all are equally fun. In my case, I needed my PhD because I'm a stubborn person who was told that because of my dyslexia, I wouldn't be able to probably even get a degree. And it's an advantage when you're a historian to have an advanced academic qualification. It's useful. Now, while I was doing my PhD, I wrote a thesis, of course. The thesis was on aircraft carriers, but whilst I was writing that, some ships kept popping up. And that was the genesis. These Travel-class destroyers were the starting point for this book, Travels, Battles and Darings. The thing about being an academic in the UK is whilst I can grow my YouTube channel, I could have 1 million subscribers, and that would actually be quite fun, because if I had 1 million subscribers, I could really have some fun times with universities. But, you know, people liking, sharing, subscribing, growing the channel, that really does make me happy, and really does help me reach more people with naval history, and that's what I really, really want to do. But for me to get promoted in my day job as an academic, and for me to get pensionable especially as well, so I get, you know, some pension in my old age, not just estate benefits, but actual proper pensions, I need to get promoted. And that's basically down to how many books you sell. And so, as no one else is going to advertise it for me, what do you think? Shameless book plug. So yeah, that's why I do one in every single video, because I am shamelessly plugging my own book. So here is the Ilyushin DB-3, and this is probably one of the best starting points the Soviets ever achieved. It was a denly bombardovich. It was a very good bomber. It was able to be a torpedo bomber and a long-range bomber, and it was actually this aircraft which would start the bombing raids on Berlin for the Soviets, 15 of them. They're excellent aircraft. They truly are. They were aircraft which were loved, whether they were being operated by the Republic of China Air Force during the Second Sino-Japanese War. They operated these till 1943, when they were replaced by B-24 Liberators. They were beloved when they were being used by Soviet crews to harass Ju-52 passenger aircraft or to finish, and actually shot one down in June 1940. They are beloved by both sides in the Winter War, as already mentioned, and they are beloved because they were useful. They were reliable. And they didn't have any of the... what was his word again? Oh yes, trivialities of issues which the Tupolev had. Now, there is a saying you can't have too much of a good thing, because if you have a good thing, you're of course tempted to model with it, and muck around and go, ooh, perhaps we could do this. And the Soviets do a lot of that with this aircraft, and they do a lot of that with the Il-4. Now, please note, before we get too far into this, one of the things that should be noted is that the Ilyushin 4 is technically a modified DB-3. It starts off as a DB-3 with changes, and sometimes people go, they're all the same aircraft, and technically you could say that the Ilyushin 4 is the DB-3F. But, I'll be getting into this, there are significant enough changes in my mind that you're dealing with a considerably different aircraft. We're not talking about Merlin to Griffin Supermarine Spitfires here. We are talking Hawker Hurricane to Hawker Tempest. They are different. We are talking, although it has the same designation, Hornet to Super Hornet. And I think the only people who believe that is the same aircraft and should therefore probably still be considered both E-18, E-18s, or F-18s, are people in Congress who believe, with a sufficient amount of copium, that they are never fooled by anyone. They are very few in number, thankfully, but there are some. There are some. Now, before I get too far into this, I'm going to say Scandi ship to you. Now, if you haven't heard about that before, how? It's our ship-shape trip for 2024. It's myself. It's Drakenfell. It's Garius the Brit. It's Dr. Dan, the medicine man. And it's Albert the Fifth Musketeer for this trip. And hopefully for future ones. A.K.A. Boom Boom Dan, as you all christened him. Or apparently he's been christened by my chat. I'm not sure how he's got that, but he's very happy with that. And we are going around Scandinavia. Now, when this goes live on the 21st, I am going to be, and I am checking this now, I am going to be in Karlskrona. However, on the 22nd, I get the train to Gothenburg. And that's where we're going to be. We're going to be in Gothenburg very shortly after this goes live. So, if you are near Gothenburg, or you know people who are near Gothenburg, and they'd like to see us, well, we'll be looking for a place to have dinner. So please tell us where to go be and we'll show up. And we'd love to meet everyone. That's literally our methodology. You tell us where you think is a good place for us to have some food. We'll be there eating food. And if everyone turns up, it'll be a party. And if you're very, very lucky, we will keep myself and Drakenfell away from the karaoke. If we are very lucky, we will make sure Dr. Dan does some karaoke. But let's get back to this, shall we? Here is the design to the DB-3, and I should say for both the DB-3 and the Il-4, I have got both their drawings, and both of them in the design sets, but their vitals are for the DB-3 this time, and the vitals next time are for the Il-4. The stats do tell you, though, what this aircraft was built for. They tell you the dilemma it's built to deal with. And that's the thing, really, for the Soviet Union. This aircraft is not a concept of operations of, we are moving away from having ships. It's, we can't afford to have enough ships, man. We don't have the industry to have ships. We're building up an aviation industry because that's the thing new modern nations, the coming nations, do. And we need something to fill the gaps, because we ain't built a navy yet. And it's going to be a while before we get one. So that's why you end up with an aircraft which has a range of 2,100 nautical miles. So it's got able to go 1,000 nautical miles away from its base, hunt around a little bit, and then head home. And that's in its original form without some of the modifications the crews can do. And there are modifications. There are lots of modifications. There's a version which is officially not produced, which is they convert it to a fighter aircraft, basically to escort strikes, with the Shevak cannon, not the 20mm cannon, not just the machine guns. And it theoretically doesn't make it through testing. They say they're not going to do the type. But there are accounts of it actually being used, possibly potentially in combat. And what it seems to be is the regiments which have these are basically going, well, you know, we've got new bombers coming in. Yeah. Let's convert the old bombers to escort them, because we haven't got any escorts for them. And so they did. They did. That was simply it. And for a bomber, it's a decent race of climb. It has a decent weaponry. It's a decent capability. It's everything you need. Okay, 237 knots is not the world's fastest, set the world on fire bomber, but it's perfectly fine for what they need to do in the mid-1930s when it's coming into service. And as such, in the 1930s, it accomplishes a lot prior to World War II. It truly does accomplish a lot prior to World War II. If I can find the right notes. It came in various versions. The D-3Ts and the 3TP, which was the prototype torpedo bomber float plane, which again only had one prototype manufactured and tested. And what we're really looking at, and of course I've mentioned the TSKB-54, the escort aircraft, or air cruiser, as some called it, which was first experiment tested on in 1938. As said, officially, none turn into that. Unofficially, I have some very interesting accounts which I have read. They went to China. 24 of them went to China along with Soviet personnel to help the Chinese learn how to use them and to utilize them. During the Soviet-Finnish War, 180 of them were concentrated on a northwestern front. They had some ski landing gear on the airplanes, all sorts of fun things. The skis weren't really great, and they had a habit of breaking the aircraft they were on. And Finnish pilots quickly discovered there was a dead zone below and to the rear of the aircraft, which meant there was no firing from that point, which resulted in a lower firing point being added, but did also allow several Finnish aviators to get to ace. And, well, as said, they did quite well, though. Then the Finnish liked to use them themselves, despite one pilot, Jorma Savanto, apparently shooting down 6 DB-3s in 4 minutes. But that... I would say, I'm not surprised if he did manage to shoot down 6 in one mission. I'm be surprised about the in the 4 minutes perspective. Unless... But then they should still... If he was coming up below a formation of 6 and they were all on line, and then he does... But they should move. They should notice their counterparts being shot out the sky. So... And they do other things. They do some really notable and weird stuff. And when I say notable and weird stuff, I mean notable and weird stuff. They make the first non-stop flight along the Moscow to Far East route. They make the first non-stop flight from Moscow to the east coast of North America. They're being very, very technical east coast of North America. They arrive in Canada. They get to Canada. And they make the first flight with an entirely female crew for the Soviets. And the aircraft that makes that flight is actually called Ukraina. There's the Kabal-Stolivov route. Full female crew. And they make modifications. They learn from experience. These aircraft keep changing and getting better engines and better weaponry and better engines and better weaponry and better bombs. One of the really interesting things about the torpedo bomber is from the get-go it's designed to use low-altitude torpedoes like the 45-36AN and the high-altitude torpedoes they were working on, and the AMG-1 mine, and they would carry all these, they would use all these. They were critical to operations. But there is an interesting scenario I have to give here, because I have to admit, in World War II service, both the DB-3 and the Il-4 don't get in a lot of torpedo strike experience. If you try and search for it, you will find some very interesting accounts of their service in the Great Patriotic War, as the Soviets called, and the Russians still call, World War II. And there are some very beautiful, beautiful propaganda accounts. But honestly, they seem to be doing far more utility as dropping mines, as a strike aircraft. They were the DB-3s were the first aircraft to bomb Berlin in 1941. They literally, it was the Baltic Fleet Air Force. It was the Naval Aviation. 15 DB-3Fs took off from Kalul Airfield and dropped bombs on Berlin. They carried out a raid without losses. Now, I would say that the small issue that you've got there is it's 15 aircraft. It's a great demonstration, but comparisons at the time, the British are sending in 160, 200 plus. There's a small raid which is like 80 aircraft. And that's realistically the problem. The big problem that becomes for the Soviets is that they keep being pushed further back, and they need to use their aircraft to attack infrastructure, to lay mines, to stop the Baltic supply routes, to destroy railway hubs, and they don't ever really have enough bombers for all the missions they want to do. The DB-3 does its best, though. It truly does. But, yeah. Now, again, the DB-3Fs, when you're talking about a DB-3F, it's actually an Il-4. Please note. This is the point I was trying to make at the beginning, and I'll try and make some points. These aircraft are run together, but they are very, very different, because to get this, they basically go, we'd like to improve everything. Okay, you want to improve everything. What is everything? Everything. We notice that fighters keep concentrating on taking out the gunners first, so we want to put armor around them. Oh, good. That's going to make the aircraft heavier, so we're going to put in heavier and more powerful engines. Oh, goody. But that's all going to require more weight, which is going to put more stress on the airframe, so we're going to have a stronger airframe. Oh, yay. We're going to want more gunners as well. Oh, yes. We also want a minor improvement in range. Yes, we're going to get an improvement in speed. Not with the first generation, because, oh my lord, the power. You're going to need more powerful engines. And this is one of the joys of development. You have a very good aircraft, but operationally it is not perfect. It is not doing everything you want. So, fine, let's upgrade. Let's upgrade. And this is the problem. They would have been in many ways better off pushing for a 4-engine aircraft. They would be in many ways better off pushing for a 3-engined aircraft. There are lots of options to give them the desired power-to-weight ratio. 2 engines, you're going with because it's quicker and easier to build, because it takes that much less support to do, and you can carry on doing it in similar rigs. And you can say you are keeping the same aircraft, but once you see how the nose cone and the structure has changed, it does look quite significantly different. And let's be honest, the turret has turned from being a rather little bump, a discreet bump, to being a bit of a carbuncle. But you do have an improvement in firepower. You do. One of the things you didn't have was an improvement in range. It's still 2,100 nautical miles with maximum internal fuel. And that drops down to 1,404 nautical miles with roughly 2,200 pounds of bombs. But it can carry rockets. It's still a good aircraft. And it's still a useful aircraft, but it is a lot more problematic to fly. There are accounts of it requiring often a navigator to take it over if it was a long flight because it was so wearing. What do I mean about that? Well, think about this. Most modern cars have power-assisted steering. Most cars these days on the road have power-assisted steering. They have all sorts of things to make you driving the car easier. There are all sorts of things which make your life easier. This aircraft at times felt not that it didn't have power-assisted steering, that it had power-assisted anti-steering. It literally was a constant, I will hold you, to keep it under control. Whereas the previous DB-3 had been a joy to fly, the rushed, really quite rapid changes and evolutions have put through the airframe, rather than starting from fresh, which they probably should have done, and instead trying to just evolve the DB-3 into this, led to issues. Now, I will say the original DB-3, that gets a fair number of aircraft. It does. It gets 1,528 produced. The Il-4, that's a little bit more. That's a little bit more. It's over 5,000. In fact, to be precise, 5,256 are claimed. And we have to be quite clear about the claiming here, because the sheer number of the services, regiments, which received these aircraft and which operated them, pretty much endless. Every heavy bomber force of any significance or note, or even that turns up in any theatre where it's actually going to be actively employed, seems to end up getting one or the other at some point in its service, and usually has both on its operating roster. I have to admit also, there are none of the DB-3s which survive today, and I think very few of the Il-4s that survive today are actual survivors. They're all rebuilds from parts that were recovered. Because despite there being thousands of them built, they weren't the modern thing. It had its fuel system redesigned. It had its internal capacity was supposed to be increased while reducing the number of fuel tanks. That had been the plan, but then the new, more powerful engines were far more power hungry. And, by the way, this has the best NATO reporting name of any aircraft, bar none. Meet Bob. Or, as some of us might call it, Bob. Yes, it is Bob. You're being bombed by Bob. If you didn't get the joke, I'm sorry. If you've watched any of Blackadder, you should be hopefully getting the joke. Hopefully I wasn't that bad. And post-World War II, they carry on being useful. They carry on providing utility. Quite often for Finland. But also for the Soviets. They're in service. Officially they're produced till 1945. First flight was officially in 1936, but that was a very long development because they don't start being produced till 1942. So that tells you all you need to know about that one's development process. And by the time they leave service, well, the Russia you are dealing with, the Soviet Union you are dealing with, is firmly into the space race. Some of them are still knocking around, still being used because they are just reliable. They might be a pain to fly, but the one thing they did inherit from their predecessor form is reliability, which was useful. For the Soviet Union, reliability was a critical factor in capability. And I will admit, this video is a lot shorter than the original draft was. This video is probably cruising to about 40 minutes. So what got cut out? Well, honestly, in the original video I included a large discussion of what I can't attest to. I can't talk about their specific operations in World War II because, honestly, the sources we have are terrible. Why do I say that? Why do I say the sources are terrible? Because the stuff doesn't add up, even for the Soviet Union. You have some people managing to go on 886 combat sorties. Anatoly Petrovich Robotsov in them. Hero of the Soviet Union who flew the Il-4. You have them serving in all sorts of critical roles and doing all sorts of interesting duties. But if we're going to talk about torpedo attacks, direct torpedo attacks, which is the focus of really looking at them, they don't have that opportunity. They're not going to. Think about what naval forces there are in the Black Sea. Think about what naval forces there are in the Baltic. Think about the force structure and scenario you have in the Baltic. Think about all the land-based fighters, etc., wandering around. It's not a good area to be a long-range torpedo bomber. But a long-range aerial mine layer, now that can have fun. That can have fun. But there are accounts of torpedo attacks. Now, some of them are really well written. And they sound too perfect. Look, I've read a lot of torpedo attacks in my time. A lot of them. I've read American ones, British ones, Japanese. I've read accounts by pretty much every nation which has conducted torpedo attacks. And I have no qualms with saying I'm sure the attacks happened, but I just don't believe the account happened as it transposed does. Because it's too perfect. The enemy was perfectly positioned for you to attack them. Really? The light was perfectly positioned for you to attack them. Truly. The waves were the perfect height. Amazing. I mean, the fact of everything turning up perfect and being described as being perfect is impossible. And then there's the other versions of the accounts you get where everything is the exact worst scenario, in which case the question should be, why the frigate are you risking your aircraft by launching that strike? If you've got massive waves which are topping your wings as you're flying in to drop your bomb, why the frigate are you doing that? And also, how the frigate is your aircraft not destroyed by the sea? Because that's happened. That happened to aircraft. And the problem I have realistically is I think quite a lot of them have been overly processed. That's my distinct impression. And I would say that even comes from some of the modern translations, because I would not describe myself as a fluent Russian speaker. I'm not. I can do technical Russian. I can look at a technical document in Russian and I can translate it. I can look at technical documents in pretty much any language, if they're technical engineering documents, and translate them. Because my dad taught me engineering. And there is a form and a standardization of how you approach engineering documents. And whilst there are some variations, pretty much everything goes through it. And it's a skill. It's a skill my dad insisted everyone in the family had. It's fun sometimes. But the thing is, when I therefore, with my limited Russian, I'm starting to question your translation, there are problems. And here is the thing. I have dealt with some good translation documents. A good translation document will have the translation they're given, and then might have a footnote below going, literal translation of this text would read as X. However, fitting in context of Y, Z, we have gone with a translation of A, as that's more appropriate contextually in the vernacular. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. But if you don't do that, you have a problem. And finally, What worried me and probably has made me question many of the accounts the most is when I looked at a DB-3 and I realised it's first starting operation in 1936 and not decommissioned from service till 1947. It's produced 37 to 41. When we look at that, and we look at its service, there is something which is missing. There is something which is missing from its service and its combat use. Yes, it's used by the Chinese against the Japanese. Yes, it's used by the Soviets against the Finnish. Yes, it's used by the Soviets against the Germans. Who is it not used by against who? It's not used against... According to the accounts you can find, it wasn't used by the Soviets against the Japanese during the Russo-Japanese War. The same war that they had to end before Russia would invade Poland. So nice of Stalin to wait till he wrapped up one war before starting another one. So, that's a problem, realistically. That is a problem. You see, I think it could have been interesting if they'd been deployed en masse to that conflict. I think they have enough range that whilst it would be difficult, there are certainly spaces from Russia they could have operated from to cause trouble for Japanese shipping. I know they're mostly concerned with humiliating the Japanese army, but it would have been an interesting learning experience for both the IJN and the Soviet Union to do that. But they don't. And that actually made me really start to question some of the things around the Soviet stated aim of their torpedo bomber capability. Because if you have this capability, if this capability is about your protection, remember, the torpedo bombers are in service from 1938 onwards. And the float torpedo bomber is being tested in 1938. So they have them around. And they're quite happy to use them as strike aircraft. Why not use them? Why aren't they using them? I'm going to presume it's numbers of trained crew. I'm going to presume that's the simplest reason is the truth. But I haven't been able to find a good account saying that. I haven't been able to find anything which is backing it up, and according to their official, and this is the trouble when you're dealing with a nation which has got such levels of propaganda as most authoritarian regimes. You finding out the truth of their preparedness versus the image of their preparedness they're trying to project is very difficult, even for historians. In fact, sometimes it's even more so for historians. Because you have two choices. You either be completely skeptical and don't believe any of their figures, which is probably not the right way to go, because some of it's probably some of it's right. Probably not everything is a complete and utter fabrication. Or you believe everything they say, which you know is going to be believing complete and utter fabrications. But that leads us neatly to the question today. So the question is, during the Soviet-Japanese War, 1939, let's say they send the DB-3s to go bombing, to go striking. From Vladivostok, it's less than 1,000 nautical miles to Tokyo. It's less than 1,000 nautical miles to Sapporo. In fact, it's very close. Are we going to say that the Soviets couldn't have operated their bombers from Vladivostok? And even if they're not using them as the heavy bombers, if they're using them as mine layers and dropping mines in key Japanese ports, they could do that. But they didn't. So the question's going to be, what do you think happens if they do? What happens if the Soviets go full offensive with their aircraft? If they do use the DB-3s in 1939? What do you think happens in the Soviet-Japanese War? What lessons do you think are learned? Do you think it ends the same way it does? Probabilistically it does, but do you think it ends the same way it does? And what the lessons do you think are learned? And what have we got coming up? Well, this comes out it comes out after the Imperial Japanese Naval Aircraft Squadron, actually, system. So before HMS Unicorn. HMS Unicorn's coming out. That's going to be fun. And I'm sure there's a premiere scheduled for Thursday. And I'm sure I need to do some recording of things, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm literally recording this video the night before I get on the plane to Norway. So it's being recorded on the 13th, and I'm now off to get some food. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel. Thank you to everyone who likes, shares, and subscribes. They really do help the channel grow, and they mean a lot to me. And thank you to everyone who supports the book habit, which you can only see in box form behind me, because they're all in boxes at the moment. These are the last 3 boxes from this office. And thank you to everyone, because this could well be the last video to be recorded in this room. Thank you to everyone who supported the naval history coming from here, from the brew shack, for the last 3-4 years. Thank you. It's going to continue. I'm going to continue, but it's going to be a new office. It's going to be a new home. It's going to be a new centre. It's going to be a new organisation in terms of the stuff around me. It's still going to all be me. I'm not getting a staff. I'm not that lucky. No, I'm not that lucky. I was thinking, could I put the dogs on the payroll, but no. They both charge me too much. But no. Thank you very much for everyone for your support. Thank you for making it possible, and take care, and hopefully see some of you soon. Toodles.